If you enjoy intriguing stories, true mysteries, and thought-provoking accounts, take advantage now to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way you won't miss any of the upcoming stories we'll be sharing here. And I also want to know something very special. Where are you watching this video from? Write your thoughts in the comments below. Your city and your country, it's always amazing to see how far these stories are reaching and connecting people from different parts of the world. The country road leading to the old Hawthorne mansion was almost invisible at night. Vegetation grew unchecked, swallowing the broken asphalt as if the place itself were trying to hide the path. A few kilometers from the small town of Winterset, in the state of Iowa, the property had remained abandoned for more than 40 years. Nobody in town liked to talk about her. Daniel Carter stopped the car in front of the rusty gate. The engine shut off with a dry thud, leaving only the cold night wind whispering through the trees. He looked at the house in the distance. The mansion stood dark against the cloudy sky, its windows broken and its walls covered in black ivy. Even from a distance, it seemed to watch whoever approached. Daniel didn't believe in ghost stories. He was an investigative journalist and had spent years debunking urban legends. For him, every mystery concealed only negligence, crime, or collective imagination. But that house was different. For decades, strange stories have surfaced about the place. Lights turning on by themselves, doors slamming in the middle of the night, and 3 people are missing. The last one was an architecture student who decided to spend a night there to film an independent documentary. He never left. Daniel opened the glove compartment and took out a tape recorder. Initial record, 11:17 p.m., he said quietly. Hawthorne property. I'm beginning the investigation. He got out of the car. The gate was crooked, held together by only one hinge. When Daniel pushed it, the metal produced a long creak that echoed through the silent property. The garden was dead. Dry trees leaned over the stone path, and the wind made branches bang against the front of the house. Daniel walked slowly to the main door. It was enormous, made of dark wood and cracked by time. When he pushed her, she wasn't locked. The door opened easily. The interior of the mansion was even more disturbing. The smell of mold was strong, mixed with something metallic, almost imperceptible. The main hall had 2 floors, with a curved staircase leading up into the darkness. The old chandelier hung crookedly from the ceiling, covered in dust. Daniel turned on the flashlight. Beams of light revealed abandoned furniture, paintings turned against the wall, and strange marks on the wooden floor. They looked like scratches. He knelt down to examine it. They weren't recent, but they weren't old enough to be 40 years old either. Daniel frowned. That didn't look right for an abandoned house. He kept walking. The main room had a huge fireplace. Above it, an old portrait still hung, a family. A tall man with a stern expression, a pale woman, and a little girl in the center. The paint on the painting was worn, but there was something strange about the child's face. She seemed frightened. Daniel provided better lighting for the painting. That's when he noticed a disturbing detail. The girl's eyes were not directed towards whoever was observing the painting. They were facing the staircase, as if looking at something behind the photographer. Daniel slowly turned the flashlight towards the stairs. Nothing. Just the dark hallway on the 2nd floor. He took a deep breath. "Old houses make noises," he murmured into the recorder. "Wood contracts. Wind creates pressure on the windows. It's normal." Even so, there was an unsettling feeling in the air. Daniel walked to the kitchen. The cupboards were open, as if someone had been hurriedly searching for something in the past. On the floor, an object caught his attention, a child's shoe, small, covered in dust. He lifted it up. There was a label inside the sole. Daniel stood motionless. The girl in the portrait disappeared in 1968. He remembered that. The case had been investigated at the time. Officially, they said she had fled, but nobody ever believed it. Suddenly, a noise echoed from upstairs, a dry crack like the sound of a footstep. Daniel raised his head. The flashlight illuminated the staircase. Silence. He stood still for a few seconds. Then another sound. This time it's clearer. Something is crawling down the upper hallway. Daniel gripped the recorder tightly in his hand. "There might be someone here," he whispered. He walked slowly towards the stairs. Each step creaked under his weight. The hallway on the second floor was long and narrow, doors aligned on both sides, all open except for one. The last door at the end of the corridor was locked. Daniel moved the flashlight closer. The doorknob was clean, dust-free, as if someone had touched her recently. He extended his hand. When her fingers touched the cold metal, a sound came from the other side of the door. A sigh. This is it. Almost human. Daniel froze, because at that moment he realized something that wasn't in the city's reports. Hawthorne Manor was never truly empty. Daniel kept his hand on the doorknob for a few seconds, trying to decide if the sound he had heard had been real or just a trick of his mind. Old houses had their own noises. Wood contracting, wind passing through invisible cracks, structures slowly succumbing to time. But that sigh sounded different. It seemed too close. He pulled his hand away from the doorknob for a moment and took a deep breath, trying to reorganize his thoughts. As an investigative journalist, Daniel had always believed that mysteries were built on collective fear and a lack of logical explanation. That was exactly what he had spent years dismantling in his reporting. Before entering the mansion, he had reviewed everything that existed about the Hawthorne case. The house was built in 1924 by Richard Hawthorne, an agricultural entrepreneur who became wealthy rapidly during the expansion of corn plantations in the state of Iowa. The mansion was seen as a symbol of power in the rural region, built on an isolated hill overlooking miles of farmland. Richard lived there with his wife, Margaret, and the only daughter, Emily Hawthorne. For years, the family maintained a respectable reputation in the town of Winterset. They participated in community events, funded small public works projects, and were frequently mentioned in the local newspaper. Everything changed in 1968. That year, Emily disappeared. The official version stated that the girl had left the house at night and never returned. The police briefly investigated the area around the property, but no concrete leads were found. A few months later, Margaret Hawthorne suffered a nervous breakdown and was admitted to a psychiatric hospital in Des Moines. Richard Hawthorne sold part of the land and abandoned the mansion shortly afterwards. He died 2 years later in circumstances that were never fully clarified. Daniel knew these details, but what had really brought him there were the inconsistencies. For decades, residents reported strange occurrences in the house. A farmer swore he saw lights on the second floor one winter night. 2 teenagers stated they heard footsteps when they entered the area to explore. And then there were the disappearances. In 1989, an urban photographer entered the mansion to take pictures of the abandoned architecture. He disappeared. In 2007, a group of college students filmed a documentary about abandoned places in the American Midwest. One of them decided to spend the night alone inside the house. He never left. The police investigated the cases, but never found evidence of a crime. No bodies, no clear signs of a struggle. The official explanation has always been the same: invaders who suffered accidents and were never found in the surrounding forest areas. But Daniel had noticed something curious when reviewing the police records. All the strange occurrences were concentrated on the second floor. Especially in the hallway where he now found himself, the journalist turned his attention to the closed door. The wood was darker than the other doors in the hallway. Small marks scratched the surface, as if someone had repeatedly scratched the outside. He shone the flashlight along the walls. The old wallpaper was peeling, revealing layers of yellowed paint underneath. On the floor, the carpet was worn, except for one specific section, a narrow path. As if someone had passed by there many times, Daniel felt a growing discomfort. If the house were truly abandoned, that wouldn't make sense. He took a step back, and then he heard another sound. this time coming from the end of the corridor. Daniel turned the flashlight around quickly. At the end of the hallway was an open door that led to Emily's old room. He knew this from the house's blueprints. Something moved in there, a quick, almost imperceptible movement. Daniel walked slowly to the room. The door creaked softly as he pushed it open. The room was small compared to the rest of the mansion. There were still traces that a child had lived there, an old cabinet, a rusty iron bed, and drawings stuck to the wall. Daniel moved the flashlight closer. The papers were yellowed, but the figures were still visible. Houses, trees, dolls. But there was something strange. Many of the drawings depicted the mansion itself. And in several of them, there was a dark figure near the stairs, high. No face. Daniel frowned. Children often draw what they see. He examined another drawing. In this one, Emily had drawn herself in the hallway, and behind her was the same figure, closer. In the bottom corner of the paper was a phrase written in childish handwriting. "He doesn't like it when we leave the room." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. Suddenly, a noise echoed down the hallway again, a dull thud. The door that he had seen closed a few minutes earlier was now ajar. Daniel felt his heart race, because he was absolutely certain of one thing. He hadn't touched that door. Daniel stood motionless for a few seconds in Emily's room, trying to control his breathing. The silence of the mansion seemed heavier now, as if the air were laden with something invisible. He slowly walked back to the hallway. The door that had previously been closed remained ajar. A thin wisp of darkness stretched across the floor, like an open mouth waiting to be observed. Daniel raised his lantern and approached. Each step made the old floorboards creak. The sound echoed through the empty hallway, heightening the feeling that he was not alone. When he reached the door, he pushed it open slowly. The room revealed by the flashlight appeared to have been an old office. Dust-covered shelves lined the walls, and a heavy wooden desk stood in the center of the room. But something was wrong there. Unlike the rest of the house, that room wasn't completely abandoned. There were recent marks on the floor, footprints. Daniel bent down. The footprints weren't clear enough to identify shoes, but dust had been swept up, forming jagged trails between the table and the back wall. He followed the beam of light to the location. A bookshelf leaning against the wall seemed slightly out of place. Daniel placed his hand on the wood and pushed. The bookshelf moved easily. Behind her was a small, hidden door. The journalist was surprised. "Interesting," he murmured to the recorder. The door was low, almost the size of a cupboard. He turned the doorknob. This time she resisted for a moment before giving in. When the door opened, a strong smell escaped from inside. A smell of dampness mixed with something older, something organic. Daniel lit up the space. It was a narrow staircase leading down to a hidden basement. The wooden steps were worn and leaning, as if they had been used for a long time. He hesitated. The original floor plan of the house that Daniel had found in the municipal archives did not show any secret basement. That meant the space had been built later, or deliberately hidden. Daniel started to go down. Each step seemed to amplify the sound of the creaking wood. The air grew colder with each step. When he reached the bottom of the stairs, he found a narrow corridor made of raw concrete. The walls were covered in marks, scratches, hundreds of them. It's as if someone had repeatedly scraped their fingernails there over many years. Daniel slowly shone his flashlight around the room. The corridor led to 3 small rooms. He entered the first one. It was empty. The second one contained only an old chair fastened to the floor with rusty screws. Daniel approached. There were deep marks in the wood of the chair arms, pressure marks, as if someone had been kept there for a very long time. The journalist felt a knot in his stomach. It no longer looked like just an abandoned house. It looked like a place used to keep someone imprisoned. He walked to the third room. When he turned on the interior light, something on the floor caught his attention. A metallic object. Daniel bent down. It was a small, rusty box. He opened it carefully. Inside there were old photographs. He grabbed the first one. It showed Emily Hawthorne sitting on the stairs of the house. The girl looked older than in the portrait in the main room, maybe about 12 years. In the second photograph, Emily was on the stairs again, but there was someone behind her. A shadow. It was not possible to see the person's face. The third photograph made Daniel hold his breath. It was a photo of the basement, from the same room where he was, and there was a person sitting in the chair, with his hands tied, head down. Daniel brought the flashlight closer to the image. The face was partially visible. It wasn't Emily. Era Margaret Hawthorne, the mother. The journalist felt a shiver run through his body. This completely changed the official story. If Margaret were trapped in that basement, so someone in the house had kept her there, and the only other person who lived there was Richard Hawthorne. Daniel was about to put the photos back in the box when he heard something in the hallway. Steps. Boards, heavy. Over it, on the upper floor of the mansion. Daniel froze. The sound stopped. For a few seconds, everything went completely silent. Then another noise emerged, but this time it didn't come from upstairs. He came down the stairs behind him. A long, creaking sound, as if someone were starting to descend. Daniel turned the flashlight around quickly. The staircase was empty, but the steps continued to creak, one by one, as if something invisible was slowly descending towards him. And for the first time since entering the mansion, Daniel felt something he had never felt before during an investigation: real fear. Daniel remained standing in the basement hallway, the flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. The creaking of the stairs ceased suddenly, as if whatever was descending had stopped midway. He kept his eyes fixed on the steps. Nothing appeared. Silence returned to the underground space, but now it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a pause, heavy with expectation, as if something were watching his every move. Daniel swallowed hard and tried to rationalize the situation. Old houses had fragile structures. Changes in temperature could cause wood to expand or contract, producing strange sounds. But that pattern of steps, it was hard to ignore. He decided to go up again. If there really was someone in the house, he needed to check. As Daniel began to climb the steps, he noticed something unsettling. The air seemed heavier than before, almost suffocating. The flashlight illuminated particles of dust floating slowly in the air, as if the atmosphere had been disturbed by some recent movement. Upon reaching the top of the secret staircase, he returned to the hidden office. Everything looked the same, except for one detail. The bookcase that concealed the passage was slightly more open than he had left it. Daniel stopped. He was certain he had pushed the bookcase almost completely against the wall as he climbed down. Now there was more space between the wood and the concrete. Someone had been tampering with it, or something. He pushed the bookcase back and left the room. The hallway on the second floor seemed even darker. The flashlight revealed marks on the carpet that Daniel hadn't noticed before. Drags, irregular lines that crossed the corridor towards the back. He followed the tracks to a different room. The door was open. The interior was larger than the other rooms. It had probably been the master bedroom of the mansion. The enormous bed was still in the center of the room, covered by a torn mattress. Old curtains hung from the windows, swaying slowly in the wind that filtered through the cracks. Daniel lit up the walls. There was something hanging above the headboard of the bed, a large painting. He approached. It was another portrait of the Hawthorne family. But it was different from what was in the room. In this one, Emily looked older, and there was something unsettling in the expressions of the three of them. Richard Hawthorne stood behind his daughter, his hands resting on her shoulders. His smile was too rigid. Margaret was sitting in a chair next to her. His eyes were not directed at the painter. They were facing Richard, afraid. Daniel then noticed an even stranger detail. In the lower corner of the painting, a date was written in thin ink, 1969, 1 year after Emily's official disappearance. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. This meant that Emily was still alive at that time, or at least he was in the house. He lit the portrait again. Something seemed wrong with the girl's face. The paint was slightly scratched in that area, as if someone had tried to erase something. Daniel moved the flashlight closer, and then he realized. Beneath the peeled layer of paint lay another expression. The artist had originally painted Emily crying, but someone changed the picture later, turning tears into an artificial smile. Daniel took a step back. That suggested something far more disturbing than a simple escape. Perhaps Emily never left the mansion. Perhaps she was kept there, like Margaret. The journalist walked over to the antique wardrobe in the room. When he opened the door, he found several boxes stacked on top of each other. Old documents, cards, medical records. He picked up one of the envelopes. It was a medical report by Margaret Hawthorne, dated 1970. Daniel read quickly. The document mentioned severe episodes of paranoia, psychological trauma, and repeated claims that her daughter was still alive inside the house. According to the report, Margaret constantly repeated the same phrase during medical interrogations. He never let Emily leave the basement. Daniel felt a chill. If that were true, so Emily didn't disappear. She was held prisoner. The journalist was about to put the documents away when he heard a new sound coming from the hallway. This time it was clearer. Steps, boards, dragged, very close. Daniel instinctively turned off the flashlight. The room plunged into darkness. The footsteps stopped outside the door. Something was there. Property. And then the doorknob began to turn slowly. The doorknob turned slowly. The metallic sound echoed in the dark room like a prolonged whisper. Daniel stood completely still beside the open cabinet. In the absolute darkness, his breathing seemed too loud, too heavy. He pressed his hand against the recorder in his pocket, trying to control his own racing pulse. The door began to open, first just a few centimeters, a little more later. The faint moonlight filtering through the window partially illuminated the hallway, but there was nobody there. Daniel frowned. The hallway was empty. Even so, the door continued to open slowly, as if someone invisible were pushing it. When it finally stopped, silence returned to dominate the mansion. Daniel waited a few seconds before turning the flashlight back on. The beam of light traveled down the corridor. Nothing. He left the room slowly. The footsteps on the carpet seemed louder now. Every sound echoed throughout the entire house. Something had changed. He could feel it. Upon returning to the main hallway, Daniel noticed a detail that hadn't been there before. On the ground, near the stairs, there was something written in the dust. He knelt down. The words were irregular, as if they had been made with fingers. "He is here." Daniel felt a chill run through his body. He lit up the entire hallway. There was nothing else written, not even footprints. Nothing explained who could have done it. He stood up slowly. That's when he heard a sound coming from downstairs. A loud noise, like something being dragged across the room. Daniel walked to the top of the stairs. The lantern illuminated the mansion's hall. The portrait of the Hawthorne family was still above the fireplace, but something had changed. It took Daniel a few seconds to realize what it was. The picture was crooked. He was absolutely certain that he had been standing straight before. A small detail, but impossible to ignore. Daniel went down the stairs. When he arrived at the main room, he walked slowly to the portrait. The frame appeared to have been moved recently. He gripped the edges and pulled. The picture came off the wall easily. Behind him, there was an opening, a dark cavity hidden inside the wall. Daniel lit up the interior. Inside, there was an old tape recorder and several cassette tapes. He picked up the device. It still had battery power. Daniel pressed the play button. The tape started to spin. For a few seconds, there was only static. Then a female voice emerged, weak, trembling. Era Margaret Hawthorne. The recording looked like it had been made years ago. "If anyone finds this, please, listen to the end." Her voice was filled with panic. "Richard said Emily ran away." "But that's not true." The tape hissed for a moment. "He keeps her here, in the house. In the basement. Daniel held his breath. The recording continued. I tried to help my daughter, but he found out. Fish. A low sob emerged on the tape. He said that if I told anyone, no one would believe me. The sound of footsteps echoed in the recording. Margaret started speaking faster. If you're hearing this, then he probably already... The recording stopped abruptly. The tape continued spinning for a few seconds before making a sharp click. Daniel stood motionless. The silence of the mansion seemed overwhelming. If Margaret had recorded that before being hospitalized, so someone had hidden the tape. And that person probably knew the truth. Daniel put the tape in his pocket. That's when he heard a sound behind him. A creaking sound of wood, very close. He turned the flashlight around quickly. The beam of light crossed the room, and he stopped on the stairs. There was someone there, a tall figure standing in the middle of the steps. Property. Daniel felt his heart race. Is anyone there? He asked. The figure did not respond. The flashlight partially illuminated his face. He was a man. Very old, a pale skin, deep-set eyes, but what made Daniel freeze completely was something else. He recognized that face. It was the same man from the family portrait, Richard Hawthorne. But that was impossible. Richard Hawthorne had died in 1970, and even if he were alive, he would have been over 100 years old. The figure remained still, observing. Then he took a slow step down. The step creaked. Daniel instinctively recoiled. And at that moment, he realized something even more disturbing. Behind the old man, there was another silhouette standing at the top of the stairs, much smaller, slim, Property, like the figure of a child. Daniel stepped back slowly, feeling his heart pounding against his chest. The flashlight trembled in his hand, its beam of light flickering between the steps of the staircase and the face of the man standing there. The old man wasn't moving quickly. He was just going down, one step at a time, with slow, heavy movements, as if each step required effort. The wood creaked beneath his feet. Daniel tried to organize his thoughts. This needed a logical explanation. Perhaps someone was living in the house, an intruder, an elderly man who had been hiding there for years. But the man's appearance was too disturbing to seem like just an illegal occupant. His face was almost identical to the old portrait, the same harsh expression, the same cold eyes. And behind him, at the top of the stairs, the small silhouette remained still. Property. Daniel tried to speak again. Who are you? The old man did not answer. He reached the last step and stopped. The flashlight's light illuminated his face better now. The skin appeared too thin, almost translucent. Deep wrinkles marked the face like cracks in ancient stone, but the eyes were alive, watching Daniel with unsettling intensity. For a few seconds, the two remained silent. Then the man spoke. His voice was hoarse, low, like someone who hadn't spoken in a long time. You shouldn't have come. Daniel felt a shiver run down his spine. I'm a journalist, he replied, trying to remain calm. I'm investigating what happened here. The old man tilted his head slowly. People always want to know. He took another step, until they discover too much. Daniel retreated again. Emily Hawthorne, said Daniel. What happened to her? The old man remained silent. For a few seconds, only the wind rushing through the broken windows could be heard. Then he answered, she never left. Daniel felt his stomach clench. Where is she? The man slowly raised one arm and pointed to the floor of the mansion, to the basement. Daniel felt his body go cold. You kept her prisoner. The old man did not answer directly. His eyes slowly moved toward the top of the stairs, for the petite silhouette. Daniel followed her gaze. The child's figure was still there. Now the light from the flashlight revealed a little more. She was a girl, old dress, long hair. His face was still partially hidden by the shadow. Daniel looked at the man again. That's impossible, he said. Emily would be over 60 years old today. The old man gave a small, crooked smile, a smile that held no joy whatsoever. Time works differently for some people. Daniel felt the fear growing inside him. "Are you saying she's still here?" The man responded with unsettling calm. "She never left." The journalist clutched the recorder in his pocket. Something about that situation seemed profoundly wrong, not just strange, but distorted. "Richard Hawthorne died in 1970, said Daniel. The old man fell silent again, for a few seconds. Then he replied, "That's what they said." The wind blew fiercely through the broken windows of the mansion. The torn curtains began to sway violently. Daniel's flashlight flickered for a second. When the light stabilized again, something had changed. The girl who had been at the top of the stairs was now 2 steps below. Daniel was absolutely certain that she hadn't moved before. He glanced quickly at the old man, but the man kept looking ahead. As if that were completely normal, Daniel felt a deep chill. "Who is she now?" The old man answered in an almost whispered voice. "The only one who survived." Daniel remained silent. Something about that sentence didn't make sense. Survived what? Before he could ask, a sound came from the basement, a strong impact, like something heavy hitting the wall, then another one, and another. Daniel looked at the floor of the mansion. The sounds were coming directly from the underground space, as if someone, or something, were trying to get out. The old man slowly turned his face towards Daniel. For the first time, there was urgency in his eyes. "You opened the door," he said. Daniel frowned. "Which door?" The man replied in a low voice. "The one that should never be opened." And at that moment, the first scream echoed from the mansion's basement, a human cry, full of pain, but impossibly. It seemed to come from several voices at the same time. The scream from the basement echoed throughout the entire mansion, reverberating off the ancient walls as if the house itself were vibrating with the sound. Daniel froze for a moment. The sound didn't seem to be coming from just one person. It sounded like several overlapping voices, screaming at the same time, filled with pain and despair. The ground beneath his feet trembled slightly. Daniel looked at the old man in front of him. "What is this?" he asked, trying to control his panic. The man did not respond immediately. His eyes were fixed on the ground, as if he were listening to something that Daniel couldn't yet fully comprehend. Then he spoke. "I kept the door closed for decades." Daniel felt his stomach churn. "Door? To what?" Another impact echoed from the basement, this time stronger. The sound of cracking wood echoed through the house. The old man took a deep breath. "When Emily disappeared, people thought I was to blame." Daniel squeezed the recorder in his pocket. "You weren't?" The man slowly raised his eyes. "I was." The answer came without hesitation, but there was something strange about the way he said it. It didn't seem like a simple confession. It seemed more complex than it seemed. "I locked her in the basement," he continued. Daniel felt a chill. "Why?" The old man looked at the stairs again, for the girl who was now standing a few steps above. "Because she changed." The wind swept through the house again, making the windows rattle. "How did it change?" The man took a few seconds before answering. "She started hearing things." Daniel frowned. "Voices?" The old man nodded slowly. Voices coming from the house, under the house. Another impact echoed from the basement, now accompanied by a metallic sound scraping against the concrete. Daniel looked at the ground. "What's down there?" The old man replied, "Something that should never have been found." He began to walk slowly around the room. Each step felt heavy, as if carrying decades of guilt. "When I ordered the mansion to be built, the workers found a natural cavity under the hill." Daniel listened attentively. "A cave?" "Yes." The man continued. "At first it just looked like an ordinary rock formation, until the sounds started." Daniel felt the tension rising. "What sounds?" The old man looked directly at him. People screaming. Another loud impact echoed from the basement. Now the floor of the room vibrated slightly. "That doesn't make sense," said Daniel. "He didn't make it for us either," the old man replied. He continued. The workers refused to continue digging. Some said they heard voices calling their names. Daniel remembered the marks on the basement walls, from the scratches, from the chair fixed to the floor. Emily?" The old man sighed. She was different. He looked at the girl again. She could hear the voices more clearly. Daniel felt his heart race. "What were they saying?" The man answered in a low voice. "They told us to open it." The journalist felt a shiver run through his entire body. Open what? Another loud bang came from the basement, now accompanied by a loud crack, like something heavy breaking apart. The old man replied slowly, "The passage." Daniel remembered the secret staircase, from the hallway, from the underground rooms. "Did you build all that just to block the place?" The old man nodded. "I needed to stop her from getting there, but you arrested your own daughter. To save the city." Daniel remained silent for a few seconds. That seemed absurd, but the screams coming from the basement made it all the harder to ignore. "And Margaret?" Daniel asked. "Why was she imprisoned?" The old man's face hardened. "Because she tried to free Emily." Another loud bang echoed, stronger than the previous ones. The floor of the room shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. The old man turned his face quickly towards Daniel. Now there was genuine fear in his expression. "You opened the secret passage." Daniel understood immediately. To the shelf, the staircase, the basement. He had removed the barrier. "I just explored the place," said Daniel. The man shook his head. "No," he pointed to the ground. "You broke the last seal." Daniel felt his blood run cold. "What happens now?" the old man replied in a deep voice. "Now, they can leave." At that moment, a different sound echoed from the basement stairs. It was no longer an impact, it was the sound of footsteps, many steps, going up. The footsteps coming from the basement began slowly. First, just one, then another one, and then many. The sound echoed through the secret staircase like a swarm moving in the darkness. These weren't normal footsteps. There was something irregular about the rhythm, as if several people were trying to climb up the narrow space at the same time. Daniel felt his heart race. "How many are down there?" he asked in a low voice. The old man did not answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the wall behind the fireplace, as if he were remembering something he had tried to forget for decades. "More than there should be," he finally replied. Another set of footsteps echoed, now louder. The wood of the secret staircase creaked under the invisible weight. Daniel felt a chill. "That's not possible," he murmured, but the sounds continued. Scratches, breaths, movement, as if something were trying to squeeze itself out of a place that was too small. The old man walked to the fireplace and rested his hands on the cold stone. "I spent years keeping that thing locked up," he said. Daniel approached. "How?" The man pointed to the portrait of the Hawthorne family, still resting on the floor after Daniel had taken it down from the wall. It wasn't just the tapes that were being hidden. Daniel looked at the cavity in the wall. It was a stamp. The journalist frowned. "A stamp?" "Yes." The old man explained. "When the sounds started in the cave, one of the workers brought in a man from the local church. A priest." Daniel recalled the old stories from the city about blessings bestowed upon the construction of the mansion. He said that place needed to be shut down. Another crackling sound echoed from the secret staircase. Now, something seemed to be scratching the concrete of the underground corridor. The old man continued. "We built several barriers. Stone, wood, iron." He looked directly at Daniel. "And symbols." Daniel looked again at the wall behind the portrait. Now that the dust had been disturbed, it was possible to see markings etched inside the cavity. Strange symbols scratched into the wood. Some were partially broken. "I destroyed it when I took the painting down," said Daniel. The old man nodded slowly. It was the last line of defense. Another impact echoed from the secret staircase, this time much closer. Daniel shone his flashlight toward the corridor that led to the hidden office. Something moved quickly in the darkness. Not enough to be seen clearly, but enough to confirm that it was already inside the house. "We need to get out of here," said Daniel. The old man shook his head. "It's no use." "Why?" "Because the house is the door." The journalist felt a profound chill. "What does that mean?" The man replied with heavy calm. "That cave doesn't end here." He pointed to the ground. "It continues. Much deeper." Daniel tried to process that. "So destroying the mansion wouldn't solve anything?" The old man replied, "It would only open up even more." Another sound echoed in the hallway. Now it was possible to hear breathing clearly. Torn, wet, as if something were struggling to breathe after being trapped for a long time. Daniel pointed the flashlight at the hallway again. A shadow flashed quickly across the wall. This time he saw better. The form was human, but it's too long. The arms appeared to be outstretched. Hands scratched at the walls as they climbed. Daniel took a step back. "These aren't people." The old man replied, "They've already gone." Daniel remained silent. Another sound came from the secret staircase. Now a body seemed to be dragging itself step by step. The wood creaked under the weight. It was then that the girl at the top of the main staircase began to slowly descend. Emily. Her steps were light, almost silent. When she reached the last step, the light from the flashlight illuminated her face for the first time. Apaley was pale, dark eyes, but there was no expression of fear, just profound sadness. She looked at the old man. "Good." The word echoed through the room. Her voice sounded distant, as if it came from very far away. The old man closed his eyes for a moment. "I tried to keep you safe," Emily answered in a low voice. "They never wanted to leave." Daniel felt his heart tighten. "Who?" The girl slowly turned her face towards him. "Those who were imprisoned." Another impact echoed in the secret corridor. Now something was reaching the top of the basement stairs. A long arm emerged from the darkness. Skinny, pale. Fingers scratched the floor of the house. Emily looked at Daniel again. "You opened the passage." Daniel swallowed hard. "Is there any way to close it?" She took a few seconds before answering. "It exists." Daniel felt a glimmer of hope emerging. "How?" Emily pointed to the dark hallway. "Someone needs to go back downstairs." Another arm emerged from the darkness. Then another one. Bodies were rising. Emily finished the sentence and closed the door from the inside. The first body emerged from the darkness of the hallway. Daniel instinctively raised the flashlight. The light revealed something that appeared human, but was profoundly deformed. The creature was hunched over, as if its bones had grown in the wrong way. Its skin was extremely pale, almost grayish, stretched taut over an excessively thin body. His eyes were open, but there were no pupils. The mouth moved slowly, opening and closing, as if trying to breathe air that didn't exist there. Behind her, other forms began to emerge. Arms, faces, bodies jostling each other down the narrow corridor. Daniel retreated. "My God." The old man remained still. He seemed to already know that. "They were trapped down there for a long time," he said. Another creature emerged from the hallway, then another one. Some were crawling, others walked unsteadily, bumping into walls as if they had forgotten how to move. The mansion's living room seemed smaller now, tighter, darker. Daniel turned quickly to Emily. "You said someone needs to lock the door from the inside." She nodded. "The passage is located past the last room in the basement." The journalist took a deep breath. "Then we need to go now." The old man raised his hand. "No." Daniel looked at him. "If no one shuts that down, those things are going to fall out of the house." The man nodded slowly. "I know." He looked at Emily. For a few seconds, father and daughter remained silent. Decades of guilt seemed to pass between the two in that instant. Then the old man spoke. "I started this." He turned to Daniel. "I'm finished." Daniel stepped forward. "You don't need..." "Necessary." Another creature emerged from the hallway. Now there were 5 of them in the room. The movements were slow but steady. They were spreading throughout the house. The old man began walking towards the secret corridor. Emily watched in silence. "Dad," she said. He paused for a second, without turning around. "I know," he replied softly. Daniel watched, not knowing what to say. The old man then entered the dark hallway. Daniel's flashlight illuminated his silhouette as he descended the secret staircase, step by step. The creatures didn't seem interested in him. They continued advancing through the house. One of them slowly turned her head towards Daniel. His neck cracked with the movement. Daniel felt fear course through his body. Emily held his arm. "Don't make any noise." The girl seemed too calm for someone in that situation. The sounds from the basement echoed again. Iron doors being pushed open, chains dragging along the ground. The old man was reaching the last underground chamber. Daniel could hear his footsteps echoing down below. Then there was silence. For a few seconds, the creatures in the room also stopped, as if they were listening. Suddenly, a metallic clang echoed throughout the entire mansion. Something serious had been shut down. The creatures began to writhe. Some fell to the ground. Others started banging against the walls. A deep scream echoed from underground. It was the old man's voice. Then another impact, stronger. The whole house shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. The creatures began to slowly disintegrate, as if their bodies could no longer remain there. One of them tried to advance down the hallway of the room, but his legs fell apart first. Another one fell near the stairs. The body dissolved into something dark that disappeared into the ground. Daniel watched, unable to believe what he was seeing. After a few minutes, the house became completely silent again. All the creatures had disappeared. Only dust floated in the air. Daniel took a deep breath. He succeeded. Emily looked at the floor of the mansion. Yes, but there was sadness in his expression. Daniel then noticed something strange. The girl seemed more transparent. The flashlight's light shone faintly through her dress. "Emily," he said. She looked at him with a small, sad smile. "The door is closed again." Daniel felt a chill in his stomach. "And your father?" Emily answered softly. "He stayed down there." The flashlight blinked again. When the lights came back on, Emily was no longer there. The staircase was empty. The entire mansion fell into absolute silence, as if nothing had ever happened. The silence inside the mansion seemed different now. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was as if something that had been putting pressure on the environment for decades had finally disappeared. Daniel remained standing in the center of the room for a few minutes, trying to process everything that had just happened. The lantern illuminated the dust suspended in the air, which slowly settled back onto the old ground. He looked at the staircase. Emily had indeed disappeared. There was no sign of the girl anymore, not even from the old man. The only evidence that something had happened was the portrait of the Hawthorne family still leaning against the wall. Daniel walked over to him. The light revealed the faces in the painting once more. Richard Hawthorne, Margaret E. Emily. Now that he was looking closely, something seemed different. Emily's expression in the painting. There used to be something disturbing there, something tense. Now, she seemed calmer. Daniel ran his hand over his face, trying to organize his thoughts. He needed to document everything. The journalist took the recorder out of his pocket. The small red light was still on. He had recorded practically the entire night. "Final entry," he said, his voice still a little shaky. "Hawthorne Mansion, Blackridge County, Iowa." He took a deep breath before continuing. "For decades, this house was considered the most haunted in the state. Stories of voices, disappearances, and apparitions kept the place abandoned for generations." Daniel walked slowly around the room as he spoke. But the truth appears to be far more complex and far darker. He stopped near the fireplace. Richard Hawthorne didn't keep his daughter prisoner out of cruelty, but out of fear of what lay beneath the mansion. The journalist looked at the floor, to the place where the secret access to the basement was located, something that doesn't belong to this world. Daniel remained silent for a few seconds, and tonight, someone finally closed that door again. The wind passed through the broken windows, making the torn curtains sway gently. The mansion seemed lighter now, less oppressive, as if an ancient presence had finally found rest. Daniel turned off the recorder. Then he walked to the main door of the house. When he opened it, the cold morning air immediately rushed in. The sky was beginning to lighten on the horizon. The first light of dawn touched the trees surrounding the mansion. Daniel took a few steps outside and looked back one last time. At home, it continued enormous, dark. But now it just looked like an abandoned building, no longer a place dominated by something hidden. The journalist took a deep breath. He knew that many people would never believe that story. Some would say it was just imagination. Others would argue that it was just another exaggerated legend of the city. But Daniel knew what he had seen. I knew what I had heard. And he knew that, somewhere beneath that silent hill, a very old door had been closed again, perhaps forever. As the days went by, something began to become increasingly clear. The mystery surrounding that mansion wasn't just a local legend or an exaggerated story told to scare away curious onlookers. There was something real hidden there, something that had been carefully silenced for decades. After weeks of analyzing old documents, forgotten maps, and property records, the billionaire finally found a clue that would change everything. In the archives of an old city library, he discovered records that mentioned a former owner of the mansion, an extremely influential man in the region, known for his fortune and political connections. But there was something strange. That man's name would abruptly disappear from historical records after a certain year, as if it had simply ceased to exist. No deaths reported, no official sale of the property, without explanation. That's when the billionaire decided to investigate the oldest part of the mansion, a wing that had been closed and forgotten for decades. The walls were dilapidated, the floor creaked under every step, and the air felt heavy, laden with an inexplicable sense of unease. During the inspection, one of the workers noticed something strange behind an old bookcase attached to the wall. There were marks on the ground, as if that piece of furniture had been moved many times in the past. With some effort, the bookcase was removed. Behind her, a small wooden door appeared, hidden within the wall's own structure. The door was locked from the inside. When they finally managed to force it open, they revealed a narrow passage leading down to an unknown underground space. The staircase was old, covered in dust and cobwebs, as if no one had been there for decades. But what they found down there made everyone fall silent. In the center of the small room was a rusty metal chest, and inside it were objects that no one expected to find. Cards, photographs, and documents that suggested something disturbing. Everything indicated that the mansion's former owner was involved in secret activities, clandestine meetings, shady deals, and decisions that could have changed the fate of many people. But the most unsettling part was yet to come. Among the documents, there was one last entry, a letter written in haste. In it, the man claimed he was being watched, and that some people would do anything to prevent the truth from coming out. It was at that moment that the billionaire realized something terrifying. Perhaps the mystery of that mansion was never solved, because someone always made sure he stayed buried. Silence fell over the basement as the billionaire and his team analyzed the documents found inside the rusty trunk. Each letter revealed fragments of a story that seemed increasingly dark. Records indicated that decades ago, the mansion was not just a luxurious residence. It had been used as a secret meeting place for powerful figures in the region, businessmen, politicians, and men whose influence shaped important decisions. There, away from the public eye, deals were made. Decisions that would affect many lives were made in absolute secrecy. But one of the letters caught the billionaire's attention. It appeared to be the last one written by the mansion's former owner. The handwriting was shaky, as if it had been written under pressure or fear. In the letter, the man confessed that he had discovered something he shouldn't have. According to him, some of the meetings held at the mansion involved much more than simple political or financial negotiations. There were schemes involving manipulation, blackmail, and decisions that could ruin reputations or destroy people who became a problem. The former owner stated that he decided to document everything. Documents, names, and evidence. He intended to reveal everything to the public, but in the last line of the letter, he wrote something that made everyone fall silent. He said that powerful people would come to the mansion that very night, and perhaps that was the last time anyone would hear from him. After that, nothing. No record. No explanation. The man simply disappeared from history. The billionaire then realized that the secret of that mansion was not just an ancient mystery. It was a carefully maintained silence. For decades, no one had thoroughly investigated what happened there, perhaps out of fear, or perhaps because some people still didn't want that truth to be revealed. Days later, some of the documents were sent to independent historians and researchers. The story began to gain public attention, but many questions still remained unanswered. Was the former owner silenced, or did he manage to escape before it was too late? Nobody knows for sure. But one thing became clear. Some secrets don't disappear with time. They just wait until someone has the courage to dig them up. Before you leave, if this story made you think or piqued your curiosity, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel and follow other intriguing stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, which city or country are you watching from? It will be amazing to see how far these stories are going.